I'm Megan Hayes, 34, a wedding photographer and event planner who just received the text that shattered my world. You're not invited to the wedding. Kimberly doesn't want you there. My own sister, the same sister whose dream wedding I'd poured over $35,000 into creating. My hands trembled as I stared at my phone, surrounded by the 55 meticulously crafted planning files I'd spent months perfecting. How could this happen? If you've ever felt the sting of family betrayal, I understand your pain. Let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever given your all only to be cast aside. Growing up in our suburban Seattle home, the dynamic between my sister Kimberly and me was established early. 5 years my junior, Kimberly was always the golden child in my parents' eyes. Patricia and Robert Hayes never tried to hide their preference, though they'd vehemently deny it if confronted. I can trace this pattern back to our earliest childhood memories. When I was 7 and Kimberly was just 2, my parents threw an elaborate birthday party for her bouncy castle, professional entertainer, custom cake. 2 months later, my 8th birthday consisted of pizza and a movie rental. When I asked why my celebration was so much smaller, my mother simply said, "Kimberly's still little. She needs more special attention." This explanation became the refrain of my childhood. By middle school, I'd accepted my role as the responsible one. While Kimberly received praise for mediocre report cards, I was expected to maintain straight as without recognition. When she broke a neighbor's window with a softball, I was scolded for not watching her more carefully. The message was clear. Kimberly's successes were celebrated. Her failures were everyone else's fault. The pattern continued through high school. I joined every club, maintained perfect grades, and worked part-time jobs, desperate for the validation my parents freely gave my sister. Meanwhile, Kimberly sailed through with average performance and maximum praise. The defining moment came during my senior year. I'd been saving for photography summer courses at a prestigious arts program. 2 weeks before enrollment, Kimberly broke her arm during a soccer game. The medical bills weren't completely covered by insurance, and my parents looked to me. "We hate to ask, Megan, but your sister needs this more than you need that photography thing." I surrendered my savings without argument, watching my dreams dissolve while Kimberly received the best orthopedic care available. Despite this setback, I pursued my passion for photography. Working 3 jobs simultaneously, I put myself through community college while building my portfolio. Every free minute was devoted to learning my craft, developing my eye, and mastering the technical aspects of photography. My parents fully funded Kimberly's education at a private university, where she changed majors 4 times before settling on communications. Each time she switched paths, my parents supported her journey of self-discovery. Meanwhile, I scraped together enough to transfer to a state university, completing my degree while launching my photography business. The early years were brutal. I worked wedding weekends while building client relationships during the week. Gradually, my reputation grew. Couples began requesting me specifically, willing to book a year in advance. I expanded into event planning when I noticed many clients struggling to coordinate vendors. 10 years of relentless work transformed my one-woman operation into Hayes Event Photography and Planning, with a small team and a respected reputation in the Seattle wedding industry. I achieved financial stability through sheer determination, despite never receiving the support my sister took for granted. Throughout this period, Kimberly's life followed a predictable pattern. After college, she bounced between jobs, never staying anywhere longer than a year. During her frequent periods of unemployment, my parents covered her rent and expenses. Occasionally, she'd approach me for loans when she wanted something extra, a vacation, designer purse, or car repair. These loans were never repaid, and any mention of repayment was met with accusations of being obsessed with money. Despite this history, I maintained hope that our relationship would eventually evolve into something more balanced. Every family gathering, I arrived with optimism that this would be the time my achievements received acknowledgement, that my parents would finally see my worth, that Kimberly would show genuine appreciation for my support. Instead, holidays followed the same script. Kimberly dominated conversations with dramatic stories of her latest adventures or challenges. My parents hung on every word, offering advice, sympathy, or celebration as needed. When I mentioned a major client success or business milestone, the response was typically, "That's nice, dear," before quickly returning attention to Kimberly. I built my business partly as validation, concrete proof of my worth that no one could dismiss. Yet no matter how successful I became professionally, the family dynamic remained unchanged. I was the reliable one, expected to give endlessly while requiring nothing in return. Kimberly was the treasured one, whose every need and want took priority. This was our family ecosystem when Kimberly met Brandon at a friend's wedding I was photographing. Little did I know this meeting would set in motion the most painful chapter of our complicated relationship. Kimberly's engagement announcement came during a Sunday family dinner 6 months after she started dating Brandon. I'd arrived early to help my mother prepare the meal, another unacknowledged expectation, when Kimberly burst through the door, literally jumping with excitement. "I'm engaged," she squealed, thrusting her left hand forward to display a diamond ring that must have cost Brandon 3 months' salary. My parents erupted in celebration, my mother immediately crying, my father pulling out a bottle of champagne he'd apparently been saving for a special occasion. I pushed aside the twinge of hurt no such bottle had appeared when I signed the lease on my studio space and embraced my sister with genuine happiness. "I'm so excited for you, Kim," I said, examining the ring. "It's absolutely beautiful." Over dinner, Kimberly recounted the elaborate proposal. Brandon had arranged a private sunset yacht cruise, complete with a string quartet, champagne, and a photographer to capture the moment he dropped to one knee. As she described every detail, I felt a familiar mixture of emotions, happiness for her joy, combined with the ache of knowing my parents would never find my accomplishments as worthy of celebration. Megan could photograph the wedding, my mother suggested, as though offering me a tremendous opportunity rather than expecting professional services. "Oh my God, would you?" Kimberly turned to me, eyes wide. "That would be amazing. And you know all the best vendors and venues. You could totally help me plan everything." Before I could formulate a response that balanced professional boundaries with sisterly support, I was saved by the arrival of Brandon and his parents, Margaret and William, who joined us for dessert. Immediately, the social dynamics shifted. Brandon's family exuded old money confidence. From Margaret's subtle but expensive jewelry to William's casual references to their vacation home in Nantucket. As conversation flowed, subtle class tensions emerged. When William asked about my photography business, his "how charming" response carried a dismissive undertone. Margaret inquired whether I had a real studio or worked from home, her surprise at my commercial space barely concealed. They spoke of Brandon's executive position at his father's investment firm with the assumption that everyone understood the prestige this carried. Through it all, I noticed Kimberly adapting, her speech patterns shifting to match their more formal cadence, her references to her job at a marketing firm suddenly more impressive than I'd ever heard her describe it. By dessert, she was performing a version of herself tailored to impress her future in-laws. 2 weeks later, Kimberly called asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss wedding stuff. I arrived at our local cafe to find her surrounded by bridal magazines, her expression unusually serious. "So," she began after we'd ordered, "I was hoping you might give me some professional advice about wedding planning. You know, vendor recommendations, timeline suggestions, that kind of thing." "Of course," I replied, genuinely pleased to share my expertise. "I'm happy to help however I can." As our conversation progressed, Kimberly's request expanded. "Actually, I was kind of hoping you might be willing to handle the photography and planning yourself." As a sister discount, you know? She smiled hopefully. It would mean so much to me to have you involved. I hesitated. Professional experience had taught me the dangers of mixing business with family, but this was my sister's once-in-a-lifetime day. I'd be happy to photograph the wedding at my family rate, I offered carefully. For the planning, I could provide consultation and recommendations rather than full-service coordination. Kimberly's face fell immediately. But I was really counting on you handling everything. No one knows what I want better than you do. Her eyes welled with tears, a strategy I'd seen her deploy successfully with our parents countless times. Brandon's parents expect something really special, and I'm so overwhelmed with everything. Against my better judgment, I agreed to provide both photography and planning services at half my normal rate, still a significant discount worth thousands of dollars. Kimberly brightened instantly, hugging me across the table and promising this would be the best sister project ever. A month later, Kimberly called me sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. When she finally calmed enough to speak coherently, she explained that their wedding budget had hit a major shortfall. Brandon's parents had offered to contribute only if the wedding was held at a specific exclusive venue they preferred, one far more expensive than Kimberly and Brandon had planned. We just can't afford it, but if we don't do it there, his parents will be so disappointed, she cried. And Mom and Dad can only help so much. I'm going to have to give up on my dream wedding. The rational part of my brain flashed warning signals, but the lifetime pattern of sacrificing for Kimberly overrode my business sense. Let me see what I can do, I heard myself saying. I have some connections at Lakeside Manor. Maybe I can work something out. That conversation became the first of many where I committed to covering another aspect of the wedding. The venue deposit of $15,000, which I secured at a slight discount through industry relationships, but still required a non-refundable payment up front. The premium photography team I'd need since I'd be busy with coordination duties on the day, $8,000. The gourmet catering package with custom menu, $7,000. Designer floral arrangements, $5,000. Each time I told myself this investment would finally heal our relationship. This grand gesture would at last make my parents see my worth. This sacrifice would transform Kimberly's understanding of my love for her. To manage the expanding project, I created a comprehensive digital planning system, 55 meticulously organized files containing everything from vendor contracts to detailed timelines, from guest list management to custom design boards. I developed a wedding website showcasing the venue and sharing accommodation information for out-of-town guests. I built spreadsheets tracking every expense, deadline, and detail. My motivation went beyond family dynamics. Professional pride drove me to create an exceptional event. This wedding would showcase my abilities, potentially attracting high-end clients impressed by the sophistication of Kimberly's celebration. More importantly, I genuinely wanted my sister to have her perfect day, despite our complicated history. As I committed tens of thousands of dollars and countless hours to Kimberly's wedding, I believed I was investing in a transformed family relationship, one where my contributions would finally be valued, my worth finally recognized. I couldn't have imagined how painfully wrong that belief would prove to be. The first 3 months of wedding planning unfolded like a dream. Kimberly and I spent weekends touring venues before settling on Lakeside Manor, a stunning waterfront estate with panoramic views of the Olympic Mountains. Using my industry connections, I secured preferred dates and negotiated access to areas normally off-limits to photography. "You're amazing," Kimberly gushed as we walked the grounds, imagining where each element would be placed. "I can't believe you got us in here. It's absolutely perfect." These moments of sisterly connection felt like validation of my decision to invest so heavily in her wedding. When we went dress shopping and Kimberly emerged in a hand-beaded gown that brought tears to both our eyes, the shared emotion seemed to transcend our complicated history. "No one else could have helped me find this," she said. hugging me tightly in the boutique. "You just get me, Meg." I poured my professional expertise into creating a custom wedding website with password-protected planning portal where Kimberly could view progress in real time. I developed detailed design boards visualizing every aspect of the celebration, from ceremony layout to reception table settings. I created comprehensive timelines ensuring every moment from rehearsal dinner through post-wedding brunch was perfectly orchestrated. Evenings and weekends became dedicated to Kimberly's wedding. I rearranged appointments with paying clients to accommodate vendor meetings for my sister. I stayed up late finalizing contracts and confirming details. My growing emotional investment matched my financial commitment, both driven by the genuine belief that this project would heal decades of family wounds. One evening, after we'd finalized the menu during a 4-hour tasting session, Kimberly took my hands across the table. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said, her eyes sincere. "This wedding would be a disaster if not for you. You're the best sister anyone could ask for." That moment of appreciation, so rare in our relationship, reinforced my hope that our dynamic was finally changing. I redoubled my efforts, determined to create an event so spectacular it would transform our family forever. The first complication arose when we met Brandon's parents at the venue to discuss their contribution. What began as a cordial walkthrough quickly evolved into something more unsettling. "So you do this professionally?" Margaret asked, examining my portfolio with a slight frown. "How charming that you've turned a hobby into a little business." "Megan's actually one of the most sought-after wedding planners in Seattle," Kimberly interjected, surprising me with her defense. "She books out a year in advance for most events." "Well, isn't that quaint?" Margaret replied, patting my arm condescendingly. "William and I used Hartwell and Associates for our anniversary celebration last year. They handle events for the governor, you know." Throughout the meeting, Brandon's parents questioned my vendor recommendations, suggesting alternatives used by their country club friends, all significantly more expensive than the premium options I'd already secured. "Darling, you simply must use Blackwood Catering," Margaret insisted to Kimberly. "They're chef-trained in Paris. This other company seems adequate, but not quite what we had envisioned for Brandon's wedding." I noticed subtle shifts in Kimberly's responses as the meeting progressed. Initially defending my choices, she gradually began deferring to her future in-laws' preferences. By the end of the walkthrough, she was nodding along to Margaret's suggestions with eager agreement, avoiding my eyes when I mentioned budget implications. "We'll just have to make it work," she whispered when I pulled her aside to discuss the additional costs of switching to Blackwood Catering, a $3,000 increase. "They're really set on it, and I want them to be happy with everything." That evening, I adjusted my financial spreadsheets to account for the catering change, along with several other upgrades Brandon's parents had insisted upon. I transferred additional funds from my business account to cover the growing expenses, telling myself this investment would be worth it for Kimberly's happiness and our improved relationship. As planning progressed, I created detailed documentation for every aspect of the wedding. My digital organization system expanded to 55 files, including vendor contracts and communication logs, detailed timelines for planning and the wedding day, guest list management with RSVP tracking, seating arrangements and table assignments, budget spreadsheets and payment schedules, design concepts with mock-ups for each space, photography shot lists and lighting plans, menu details and dietary accommodation tracking, transportation schedules for wedding party and guests, contingency plans for weather and other potential issues. Each file represented hours of work and professional expertise I'd normally charge thousands for. For Kimberly, I provided these services with the same dedication I offered my highest-paying clients, perhaps even more, given my emotional investment in her perfect day. The complexity of balancing my business responsibilities with Kimberly's wedding grew challenging. I found myself working 7 days a week, handling client obligations during business hours and focusing on Kimberly's wedding evenings and weekends. Despite the strain, I remained committed, believing this project would finally earn me the family recognition I'd sought my entire life. What I didn't realize was that the foundation for this belief was already cracking beneath my feet as Kimberly increasingly aligned herself with Brandon's family's expectations and attitudes, setting the stage for the painful betrayal to come. 6 months before the wedding, the dynamic between Kimberly and me shifted noticeably. What began as collaborative planning sessions devolved into critique sessions where nothing I presented seemed to meet her standards. During a meeting to finalize reception details, Kimberly rejected the table layout I'd spent days perfecting, a design that maximized both aesthetics and guest comfort while accommodating the venue's structural limitations. "This just looks so basic," she said, wrinkling her nose at my carefully crafted floor plan. "Brandon's mom showed me the layout from his cousin's wedding at the Four Seasons. Can't we do something more like that?" "The Four Seasons has a completely different space configuration," I explained patiently. "Their ballroom doesn't have support columns to work around like Lakeside Manor does." "Well, can't you figure something out? You're supposed to be the professional here." Her tone carried an edge I'd never heard her use with me before. "Margaret says a good planner can make any space work." I noticed Kimberly had begun adopting not just Margaret's opinions, but her mannerisms and speech patterns. She referenced Margaret and William constantly, while our own parents became simply Mom and Dad. She began criticizing vendors and services she had previously loved, always with phrases suspiciously similar to comments Brandon's mother had made. After hours of revisions to satisfy Kimberly's suddenly changed preferences, she approved a new layout that required renting additional decor pieces and specialty furniture, adding $2,000 to the already stretched budget. When I mentioned the cost increase, she sighed dramatically. "If it's too expensive, just say so. I'm trying to have one special day, but I guess that's too much to ask." "That's not what I said," I replied, hurt by her mischaracterization. "I just wanted to make sure you understand the financial implications before we commit." "You're always so focused on money," she said dismissively. "This is my wedding, Megan. It's supposed to be about love, not spreadsheets." I absorbed the additional costs without further comment, transferring more money from my business account to cover the growing expenses. That night, reviewing my financial commitments to Kimberly's wedding, I felt the first serious doubts about my decision to invest so heavily. Still, I pushed these concerns aside, telling myself this tension was just normal, bridal stress that would pass. 5 months before the wedding, a more significant red flag appeared. From the moment Kimberly announced her engagement, she had promised I would be her maid of honor. "Who else would I possibly choose?" she had said. "You're my sister and my best friend." I'd been touched by the sentiment, despite knowing our relationship had never truly reflected that level of closeness. I'd embraced the role, ready to support her through every pre-wedding tradition. Then came the brunch where Kimberly announced her final bridal party selections to her friends. I arrived to find her already seated with 6 other women, champagne flowing freely. "There's my amazing sister and wedding planner," Kimberly called as I approached. The phrasing, "sister and wedding planner," not maid of honor, sent a warning tingle down my spine. As I took my seat, Kimberly raised her glass. "I want to thank everyone for being here today. As you know, I've been thinking hard about my bridal party. Julia, my roommate from college and ride or die for the past 10 years, I'd be honored if you'd be my maid of honor." The table erupted in congratulatory exclamations while I sat frozen, glass halfway to my lips. Julia, looking uncomfortable, gave me an apologetic smile. And of course, my bridesmaids, Taylor, Zoe, Ashley, Paige, and my sister Megan, Kimberly continued, as though this arrangement had always been the plan. Later, when I pulled her aside to ask about the change, Kimberly acted surprised by my confusion. "I thought you'd be relieved," she said. "You're already doing so much with the planning and photography. This way you won't have the added stress of maid of honor duties." But you specifically asked me to be your maid of honor, I reminded her. We talked about it right after you got engaged. Did I? I don't really remember that. Anyway, it makes more sense this way. Julia can handle all the bridal party stuff while you focus on making the wedding perfect. She patted my arm condescendingly, a gesture eerily similar to Margaret's. It's really for the best. Before I could respond, Kimberly rejoined the group, leaving me with the distinct feeling I'd been demoted. The feeling intensified when she announced the bridesmaid dresses would be custom-made by a designer Margaret had recommended at $800 each. Isn't that a bit expensive for bridesmaid dresses? I asked carefully, thinking of the financial burden this would place on her friends. Margaret says quality shows, Kimberly replied dismissively. If it's too much for you, just say so. I'm sure we can find something off the rack that won't clash too badly with the designer dresses. The implication was clear, pay up or be visibly out of place. I added another $800 to my growing wedding expenses, wondering when my sister had become this person I'd barely recognized. At a bridesmaid gathering the following week, I overheard Kimberly in the kitchen talking to Julia and Taylor. It's actually working out perfectly having Megan as just the wedding planner, she was saying. She's so detail-oriented and bossy anyway. Can you imagine her trying to be maid of honor too? Total control freak disaster. The casual cruelty of her words stung far more than the demotion itself. When I attempted to discuss how her comment had hurt me, Kimberly immediately turned defensive. Oh my God, were you eavesdropping on me? That's so invasive. I was just joking around with the girls. You're being way too sensitive. By the end of the conversation, somehow I was apologizing to her for overreacting and adding stress during her wedding planning process. This pattern, Kimberly behaving thoughtlessly, then making me feel guilty for my natural response, had defined our relationship for years, but never had it been so blatant or painful. For months before the wedding, tensions escalated during a family dinner. My parents had invited Kimberly, Brandon, and me for a wedding update meal. Throughout the evening, my parents lavished praise on every decision Kimberly described, from the hand-calligraphed invitations to the custom cocktail named after her and Brandon. You have such exquisite taste, sweetheart, my mother gushed. Everything sounds absolutely perfect. Not once did anyone acknowledge that most of these perfect elements were either my suggestions or directly paid for by me. When the conversation turned to the recent venue change necessitated by unexpected renovations at the original location, my father praised Kimberly's quick thinking in securing an even better property. Actually, I interjected gently, that was a pretty stressful situation. I had to call in several professional favors and pay a rush booking fee to secure the new venue. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My mother recovered first. Well, it all worked out, didn't it? Let's not focus on the problems now. I'm not focusing on problems, I clarified. I just wanted to mention that securing that venue on short notice wasn't simple, and it required significant additional investment. There you go again. Making everything about money, Kimberly sighed dramatically. We get it, Megan, you're contributing financially. Do you want a medal? That's not what I began, but my father cut me off. Your sister's under a lot of stress with this wedding, Megan. Let's not add to it by bringing up finances at the dinner table. It's in poor taste. Brandon's father had made a nearly identical comment about poor taste when I'd mentioned budget considerations during a previous meeting. The parallel was striking. Kimberly wasn't just adopting Margaret's attitudes. My parents were now mirroring the Thompsons' dismissive approach as well. From across the table, Brandon gave me a look that seemed almost sympathetic, but he remained silent as Kimberly launched into another story about Margaret's connections, securing them a meeting with a celebrity baker. I excused myself early, claiming a client emergency. Sitting in my car outside my parents' house, I finally allowed the tears to flow freely. Decades of family dynamics crystallized in that dinner conversation. My contributions minimized, my concerns dismissed, my sister's desires elevated above all else. Still, I couldn't bring myself to withdraw from my commitments. Too much money had already been spent, too many professional relationships leveraged. More importantly, a lifetime of putting Kimberly's needs before my own had conditioned me to ignore my instincts when they conflicted with my sister's happiness. I drove home that night rationalizing Kimberly's behavior as pre-wedding anxiety, my parents' dismissiveness as wedding excitement, my own hurt feelings as oversensitivity. I told myself everything would improve after the wedding, that this tension was temporary, that my sacrifices would eventually be recognized and appreciated. How wrong I was. 3 months before the wedding, disaster struck. I received a frantic call from Kimberly at 7:30 in the morning. "The venue just called. They're canceling our contract," she wailed, her voice shrill with panic. "Something about new management and policy changes. What are we going to do? The wedding is ruined." I immediately shifted into problem-solving mode, setting aside my own work schedule for the day. "Let me handle this," I assured her. "I have contacts at several comparable venues. We'll figure something out." For the next 48 hours, I worked nonstop, calling in every professional favor I'd accumulated over a decade in the wedding industry. I reached out to venues I knew were typically booked 2 years in advance, leveraging personal relationships with managers and owners. I negotiated with vendors to adjust their schedules for the new date we might need to select. Finally, I secured an even more exclusive location. Crescent Harbor Estate, a private property rarely available for events. The owner, a former client whose daughter's wedding I'd photographed, agreed to host Kimberly's celebration as a personal favor to me. There was, however, a significant catch. The rental fee was $5,000 more than our original venue. Additionally, the date shift required rush fees for several vendors to accommodate the change. In total, the venue crisis added nearly $8,000 to the already substantial budget. When I called Kimberly with the news that I'd saved her wedding, her response was lukewarm at best. "Crescent Harbor? Isn't that kind of rustic?" she asked, her tone doubtful. "Rustic? It's a $7 million estate with manicured gardens and a ballroom," I replied, bewildered by her reaction. "It's actually an upgrade from Lakeside Manor. Most couples can't even get on their waiting list." I guess it could work. Let me check with Brandon's parents. They might have concerns about the location being too remote. I bit back my frustration. The property was exactly 3 miles further from the city than our original venue, hardly what anyone would consider remote. More importantly, I'd just performed a minor miracle securing any suitable venue on such short notice, depleting my professional goodwill and personal savings in the process. Later that day, Kimberly called back. "Margaret and William drove by Crescent Harbor. They think it will be acceptable, though Margaret mentioned the gardens aren't as well maintained as the ones at her country club. But beggars can't be choosers, I suppose." The dismissive response to my extraordinary effort stung, but I focused on the practical aspects of transitioning to the new venue. I updated all 55 planning files, notified vendors, and adjusted timelines. I transferred additional funds from my rapidly diminishing savings to cover the increased costs, telling myself this crisis management was an investment in both my sister's happiness and our future relationship. 2 months before the wedding, I planned and hosted Kimberly's bridal shower at an upscale restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. I personally covered the $4,000 bill, which included a private dining room, custom menu, professional photographer, and personalized gifts for each guest. I arrived early to oversee setup, ensuring every detail reflected Kimberly's taste, from the specific shade of pink in the floral arrangements to the hand-lettered place cards at each setting. The event was picture-perfect, exactly as I'd envisioned. When Kimberly arrived with our mother and Margaret, I greeted them warmly, excited to reveal the carefully crafted celebration. "This is lovely," Margaret commented, surveying the room with a critical eye. Very similar to the shower I arranged for my niece last year, though we used peonies rather than these. What are these again? Garden roses, I replied. Kimberly mentioned they're her favorite. Peonies have more presence, don't you think? Well, it's charming nonetheless. Throughout the event, I noticed Margaret subtly taking credit for elements I'd arranged, commenting to guests about helping select the menu or suggesting the signature cocktail, neither of which was true. More disturbing was Kimberly's willingness to reinforce these false claims, nodding along as her future mother-in-law essentially erased my contributions. During gift opening, I overheard Kimberly speaking to her college friends at the next table. Margaret has been such a lifesaver with all this wedding stuff, she was saying. Thank God for her connections and taste level. My sister has all these budget ideas that would have made the whole thing look so DIY and cheap. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. The budget ideas she was mocking had cost me tens of thousands of dollars, money I diverted from my business growth and personal savings to fulfill her dreams. The carefully curated vendor team I'd assembled represented the top professionals in Seattle's wedding industry, many of whom had adjusted their premium rates as a personal favor to me. When I attempted to discuss her comments later, Kimberly immediately became defensive. Were you spying on my private conversations? That's so weird, Megan. I was just talking to my friends. I wasn't spying. I was sitting at the next table and couldn't help overhearing, I explained. It hurt to hear you dismissing all the work and money I've contributed as budget ideas. Oh my God, you're so sensitive. It was just girl talk. Besides, Margaret has been incredibly helpful with her connections. Margaret hasn't paid for anything, I pointed out quietly. I've covered almost every major expense for this wedding. There you go again, making everything about money. Kimberly threw her hands up dramatically. It's my bridal shower, Megan. Can't you just be happy for me for once instead of keeping score? Before I could respond, our mother intervened, not to mediate, but to admonish me. Kimberly's right, Megan. This is her special time. Whatever issues you have can wait until after the wedding. I retreated, swallowing my hurt as I'd done countless times before. The pattern was so familiar it felt almost scripted. Kimberly behaves thoughtlessly. I express legitimate feelings. Family portrays me as the unreasonable one disrupting Kimberly's happiness. 1 month before the wedding, the final blow to my illusions came when I discovered I'd been excluded from Kimberly's bachelorette weekend. I learned about the 3-day trip to Napa Valley not through an invitation, but via Instagram, where Julia posted photos of custom team bride jackets with everyone's names embroidered, everyone except mine. When I called Kimberly to ask about the oversight, her explanation left me speechless. It's not an oversight, Megan. I decided it would be better to keep my friend group separate from the wedding planning stuff. You're handling so much already with the coordination and everything. But I'm your sister, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. And technically one of your bridesmaids, even if not the maid of honor anymore. Yeah, but you're also the wedding planner. It would be weird to have you at the bachelorette party. You'd probably be all stressed about wedding details instead of having fun. She paused before adding, plus, some of the girls find you a bit intense. No offense. Despite this devastating exclusion, I continued finalizing wedding details, confirming vendors, and processing final payments from my credit card. I completed the seating chart Kimberly had been avoiding, organized transportation for the wedding party, and finalized the day of timeline, all while nursing a growing sense of dread about my place in my sister's life. Then came the text message that shattered everything. I was at my desk reviewing the reception layout one final time when my phone chimed with a group message. The participants included Kimberly, my parents, Brandon, and his parents, everyone except me. Kimberly had apparently sent it without realizing I could see the previous messages in the thread. I scrolled up to find a conversation about final wedding arrangements, followed by Margaret questioning whether I would behave appropriately around their extended family and business associates. Then came the message that stopped my heart. You're not invited to the wedding. Kimberly doesn't want you there. Your presence would make things uncomfortable for Brandon's family. My father had added, Megan, we hope you'll be mature about this and understand. This is Kimberly's special day. My mother, it's really for the best, dear. You can still finish the planning work, of course. And finally, from Kimberly, we still expect everything to be handled professionally. All the vendors are paid for, so there shouldn't be any issues with you not attending. I stared at my phone, unable to process what I was reading. After $35,000 of my money, hundreds of hours of professional work, and emotional investment beyond measure, I was being uninvited from my own sister's wedding, the wedding I had largely funded and entirely planned. The casual cruelty stunned me. Not just the uninviting, but the expectation that I would continue working on an event I was no longer welcome to attend. The assumption that I would accept this humiliation without protest. The complete disregard for my feelings, contributions, and place in the family. In that moment, staring at those heartless words on my screen, something fundamental broke inside me, and something else, something stronger, began to form in its place. The physical symptoms hit me first. My hands trembled so violently I dropped my phone. My chest constricted as though caught in a vice, each breath becoming a conscious struggle. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as nausea rose in my throat. I read the messages again, and then a third time, hoping I'd misunderstood, looking for any interpretation besides the obvious one. My family had decided I was an embarrassment, unworthy of attending the wedding I'd poured my heart, soul, and savings into creating. When the reality finally penetrated, I broke. Alone in my home office, surrounded by wedding planning files and vendor contracts, I collapsed into heaving sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of me. Years of suppressed hurt, decades of feeling second best, a lifetime of giving without recognition, it all erupted in a tidal wave of raw emotion. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I managed to call my best friend Rebecca, my voice so distorted by crying she initially didn't recognize me. I'm coming over, she said immediately. Don't move. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Rebecca arrived to find me still in the same position, staring blankly at my phone. She read the messages, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to fury. This is beyond unacceptable, she said, sitting beside me and taking my hand. This is emotional abuse, Megan. From your entire family. With Rebecca's steady presence as anchor, I poured out everything, not just the wedding disaster, but the lifetime of family dynamics that had led to this moment. I described the pattern of being expected to give endlessly while receiving nothing in return. The constant dismissal of my needs and feelings. The celebration of Kimberly's every whim while my achievements went unacknowledged. I've been so stupid, I concluded, fresh tears flowing. I actually believed this wedding would change things. That if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, they'd finally see me. Finally value me. You weren't stupid, Rebecca countered firmly. You were hopeful. There's a difference. And they've exploited that hope your entire life. For the next 2 days, I couldn't function normally. Rebecca stayed with me, fielding calls from concerned clients and bringing me food I couldn't eat. I oscillated between numbness and crushing pain, between disbelief and rage, between lifelong conditioning to prioritize Kimberly's happiness and the dawning realization that I deserved better treatment. On the third day, I began to think more clearly. With Rebecca's encouragement, I reviewed exactly what I'd contributed to the wedding. Venue deposits and payments, $20,000. Photography and videography team, $8,000. Catering and bar package, $7,000. Floral arrangements and decor, $5,000. Additional vendor deposits and fees, $3,000. Bridal shower, $4,000. In total, I had invested over $47,000, far more than my initial estimate of $35,000, along with countless professional hours and emotional energy. And for this extraordinary generosity, I had been cast aside when I no longer served my family's purposes. "This isn't love," Rebecca said quietly as we reviewed the figures. "This is exploitation." I contacted an attorney friend who specialized in contract law, explaining the situation and asking about my legal obligations. His assessment was clear. While I had moral and professional responsibilities to the vendors I'd personally contracted, I had no legal obligation to continue providing unpaid services for an event I was now explicitly uninvited from attending. "Document everything," he advised. "Every text, every email, every payment. Create a comprehensive record of your contributions and communications. Then decide what you want to do next from a position of knowledge rather than emotion." For the next several hours, I methodically compiled evidence of my financial and professional investment in Kimberly's wedding. I created backups of all vendor communications and contracts. I documented every payment with date, amount, and purpose. I secured copies of text messages and emails showing the evolution of my involvement and the family's expectations. Throughout this process, something shifted within me. The shock and hurt began to transform into clarity and resolve. I recognized that this devastating text message was merely the culmination of a lifetime pattern, not an isolated incident. I saw with painful clarity how I had participated in my own mistreatment by continually accepting the unacceptable. With this new perspective came a decisive plan of action. I would not continue to enable my family's exploitation. I would not silently absorb this final humiliation. I would stand up for myself with the same ferocity I'd always directed toward protecting Kimberly's interests. I carefully composed my response, reviewing it with both Rebecca and my attorney to ensure it conveyed my position clearly without creating legal liability. Then, with a steadiness that surprised me, I sent a single message to the group thread. "Then pay for it yourselves, leeches." Before anyone could respond, I systematically executed the next phase of my plan. First, I created secure backups of all 55 wedding planning files for my own records and protection. Then, with Rebecca witnessing the process, I deleted each file from my active systems: the comprehensive timeline, the vendor contact list, the detailed seating chart, the custom floor plans, the specialized photography shot list, all of it. Next, I contacted each vendor I'd personally hired, explaining that circumstances had changed and providing new billing information for final payments. I canceled payment authorizations on my credit cards and notified my bank to block any pending charges related to the wedding. Finally, I blocked every member of my family and Brandon's family on my phone, email, and all social media platforms. The digital severance was swift and complete. A virtual door slammed on decades of toxic family dynamics. When it was done, I sat in unexpected silence, my breathing steady for the first time in days. The pain remained, a raw wound that would take time to heal, but alongside it grew something new and unfamiliar, a sense of power. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself over Kimberly's demands, my own well-being over my parents' expectations. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked cautiously. I considered the question carefully before answering. "Like I'm finally standing up straight after a lifetime of bending to fit into a space too small for me. The road ahead would be difficult. I knew there would be financial consequences, potential professional complications, and the emotional aftermath of family estrangement. But in that moment of newfound dignity, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in relation to my family: peace. The response to my actions was swift and predictable. Within minutes of sending my message and implementing my plan, my phone exploded with notifications before the blocks took effect. Voicemails ranged from Kimberly's hysterical accusations to my father's cold fury to Brandon's parents' threats of legal action. I listened to each message once, documented it, then deleted it. Each voice carried less power than it would have days earlier. My family's ability to manipulate my emotions through guilt, obligation, and fear had diminished dramatically once I recognized the pattern for what it was. My attorney confirmed what I already suspected. Despite the threats, my family had no viable legal claim against me. I had documentation proving my financial contributions were gifts, not loans or contractual obligations. I had fulfilled all professional commitments to vendors, ensuring they would be paid for services rendered. I had protected myself while acting ethically toward the innocent third parties involved in the wedding. The most difficult period was the first 2 weeks of separation. Decades of conditioning had trained me to prioritize family harmony above my own well-being. Each day required conscious effort to maintain my boundaries, to remind myself I deserved better treatment than I had received. I worked with a therapist Rebecca recommended, beginning the long process of untangling my self-worth from my family's approval. Through industry connections, I learned Kimberly's wedding proceeded as scheduled, though drastically downsized and relocated to Brandon's parents' country club. The elaborate details I'd arranged were replaced with standard club offerings. The premium vendor team I'd assembled was substituted with the club's regular service providers. The dream wedding Kimberly had envisioned, and I had largely funded, became a more modest celebration constrained by what her family was actually willing to pay for. On what would have been the wedding day, I took Rebecca's advice and planned a self-care retreat. I booked a cabin on the Olympic Peninsula, far from cell service and wedding venues. I hiked through ancient forests, photographed landscapes rather than carefully posed couples, and allowed myself to fully experience the complex emotions of the day without judgment. Surprisingly, several extended family members reached out with supportive messages. My mother's sister, Aunt Catherine, called to say she declined to attend the wedding after learning how I'd been treated. My cousin Michael sent a text expressing his disgust with Kimberly's behavior and asking if I needed anything. These unexpected allies helped me recognize that not everyone in my family shared my parents' and sister's values, a realization that provided comfort during the lonely initial months. 6 months after the wedding incident, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The financial setback of Kimberly's wedding required strategic adjustments to my business, which ultimately strengthened my professional practices. I implemented clear contracts for all clients, including family, with detailed payment schedules and scope of work limitations. I established healthy boundaries with clients who exhibited warning signs of Kimberly-like entitlement. Most importantly, I reclaimed time and creative energy previously consumed by family drama. I developed new photography techniques I'd been too busy to explore, launched a mentorship program for emerging photographers, and cultivated client relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Therapy helped me process the grief of family estrangement because it was grief, despite the toxicity of those relationships. I mourned the family I had wished for rather than the one I actually had. I acknowledged the pain of rejection while recognizing it reflected their limitations, not my worth. Through this healing process, I developed what my therapist called a chosen family, relationships built on genuine care and reciprocity rather than biological obligation. Rebecca remained my steadfast supporter. Industry colleagues became close friends. Former clients invited me into their lives as more than just their photographer. These connections, freely chosen and mutually nurturing, began filling the void left by family estrangement. 1 year after the wedding, unexpected news reached me through my aunt. Kimberly and Brandon were having serious marital problems. According to family gossip, Brandon's parents had become increasingly controlling, criticizing Kimberly's background and career choices. The golden daughter was experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be found wanting by the Thompsons, an ironic turn of events I observed with complicated emotions. 2 weeks later, my parents called. After a year of silence, their voicemail struck a tentatively conciliatory tone. "We've been thinking about things," my mother said. "Perhaps we could meet for coffee and talk." My father added awkwardly, "Families should find a way to work things out." I considered their invitation carefully, consulting both my therapist and trusted friends before responding. The old Megan would have jumped at this opportunity, desperate for reconciliation at any cost. The new Megan approached it with careful boundaries and realistic expectations. I agreed to meet them, not at their home or mine, but on neutral ground with a defined time limit. I prepared myself for various scenarios, from genuine apology to subtle manipulation. I clarified in advance what I needed from them to consider rebuilding our relationship. Acknowledgement of their role in the wedding disaster, recognition of the long-standing family dynamic that enabled it, and commitment to healthier patterns moving forward. Whether this tentative reconnection will lead to meaningful change remains to be seen. What matters more is that I no longer depend on their validation for my sense of self-worth. I've discovered that family relationships, like all relationships, should be evaluated by how they impact our well-being, not by the accident of shared DNA. The most profound transformation has been internal. I've learned that love shouldn't require financial sacrifice or emotional martyrdom. I've recognized my worth exists independently of others' ability to acknowledge it. I've found peace with my decisions regardless of whether reconciliation with my family ultimately occurs. I've built confidence in setting and maintaining boundaries, not as punishment or retaliation, but as necessary protection for my well-being. I've created a life based on mutual respect rather than obligation, surrounding myself with people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. Most importantly, I've discovered that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to say no to mistreatment, especially when it comes from family. If you've ever struggled with family dynamics where you feel undervalued or taken for granted, I hope my story helps you recognize your worth. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to value themselves. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength through difficult situations. Remember that you deserve relationships that honor your worth, whether they're with family, friends, or partners. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to stand in your own power, whatever challenges you might be facing.